The night sky stretched endlessly above Flight 447, a vast canvas of darkness broken only by scattered stars that seemed impossibly distant. Captain Sarah Mitchell sat in the left seat of the Boeing 777's flight deck, her hands resting confidently on the yoke, her eyes scanning the instrument panel with the practiced ease of someone who had logged over 15,000 hours in commercial aviation. At 52 years old, Sarah had seen nearly everything the aviation world could throw at her: severe weather systems, engine failures, hydraulic malfunctions, emergency medical situations at 35,000 feet. But nothing quite prepared you for the moment when everything changed in an instant. The aircraft maintained a steady cruising altitude of 35,000 feet, heading northwest across the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean towards San Francisco International Airport. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday night. The cabin was dark and quiet, most of the 300 passengers lost in sleep, their heads tilted against windows or their partners' shoulders. Somewhere in the darkness behind her, flight attendants rested in the crew quarters, rotating their brakes to ensure coverage. In the first-class cabin, the soft glow of individual entertainment screens flickered occasionally. In economy, the seats were compressed tightly together, filled with people dreaming of their destinations, families reuniting, business travelers heading home, honeymooners on their way to adventure. Sarah had been flying this exact route for the past 8 years. She knew every waypoint, every navigational marker, every characteristic of this particular aircraft. Flight 447 was one of her favorites, a reliable machine that had logged over 65,000 flight hours. She'd flown her on 237 previous flights without incident. The aircraft responded to her touch like a trusted friend, and she trusted it implicitly. Her co-pilot, First Officer Marcus Chen, was a competent 34-year-old professional with over 6,000 flight hours. He sat to her right, his attention divided between the instrument panel and the pre-programmed flight management system. "The weather is looking clear all the way to San Francisco," Marcus commented, glancing at the meteorological data displayed on one of the screens. "Should be a smooth descent." Sarah nodded, allowing herself the luxury of a small smile. These were the nights she lived for, the quiet flights where everything operated exactly as designed. She thought briefly about her grandchildren waiting for her at home. She'd promised to take them to the park on Saturday. Her daughter had made her swear not to cancel again. These thoughts, along with the steady hum of the engines, created a comfortable rhythm to the flight. That rhythm was about to shatter. It started as a vibration, subtle at first, barely noticeable unless you were paying close attention. Sarah felt it through the yoke before any instrument registered it. Her mind immediately began processing possibilities. She'd felt thousands of vibrations in her career. Most meant nothing. This one felt different, wrong. "Did you feel that?" she asked Marcus, her tone casual but alert. "Feel what?" he replied, glancing up from his screen. The vibration intensified. Now it was unmistakable, a rhythmic pulsing that reverberated through the entire airframe. Sarah's eyes narrowed, focusing intently on the engine display. Left engine temperature climbing. Rapidly. The numbers ticked upward with alarming velocity. "Something's wrong with number 1, Sarah said, her voice dropping into the calm, professional register she'd cultivated over decades of flying. No drama, no emotion, just facts. Marcus leaned forward immediately, his training kicking in. "What are you seeing?" "Temperature spike. EGT is climbing past." That's when the world exploded. A violent boom reverberated through the aircraft, so loud and violent that it felt like the entire left side of the plane had been hit by an invisible sledgehammer. Alarms erupted simultaneously, multiple warnings screaming through the cockpit at once. The fire bell, the engine warning bell, the overheat alarm. Red lights flashed across the instrument panel like a terrible Christmas display. The aircraft lurched violently to the left as the dying engine's thrust ceased. Sarah's hands moved instantly, her muscle memory and training operating at a level deeper than conscious thought. Left engine throttle fully back. She killed power to the damaged engine before it could cause further damage. Her eyes darted across the engine display even as her hands worked the controls. What she saw made her blood run cold. Number 1 engine showed critical pressure, elevated temperature, and something worse. The oil quantity indicator was dropping rapidly. "Engine 1 failure," she announced, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around her. "Engine fire light, we're shutting her down." Marcus was already running through the emergency checklist, his hands shaking slightly as he reached for the fire extinguisher handle for Engine 1. He pulled it, then pulled it again, injecting foam into the damaged engine's core. The vibration gradually diminished, but the aircraft remained severely crippled. Flying on one engine was possible. It was regulated. It was survivable, but not optimal, not preferable, not when you had 300 human beings depending on your decisions. Behind them, the cabin erupted into chaos. The violent shaking had jolted hundreds of sleeping passengers awake instantly. Screams echoed through the cabin, genuine primal sounds of fear. A passenger's drink spilled across the armrest. A child's toys scattered down the aisle. A woman started crying. An older man gripped his armrest so hard his knuckles turned white. The flight attendants, trained for emergencies but never truly prepared for the reality of them, rushed to their stations, trying to maintain composure and calm passengers. Sarah heard the chaos through the open door to the main deck, but she didn't allow it to penetrate her focus. She was in her element now, operating in the space where fear transforms into purpose. "Oxygen masks, she heard a flight attendant shouting. "Good, procedure, exactly what needed to happen." "ATC, this is Flight 447, Sarah transmitted, her voice cutting through the static like a blade of steel. "Declaring emergency. We've suffered a catastrophic failure in number 1 engine. We are operating on single engine and requesting vector to nearest suitable airport." The response came back immediately, slightly breathless. "Flight 447, copy emergency declaration. What is your current position?" "Currently 380 miles from Naval Station Coronado. 320 miles from San Francisco International. We're assessing capability and will advise momentarily." Sarah's mind was already calculating. The aircraft was heavy, fully loaded with fuel for the overnight flight, fully loaded with cargo, fully loaded with human beings. Flying on a single engine at this altitude was possible, but descending, she would be a crippled bird gliding downward with no margin for error. One engine couldn't maintain altitude indefinitely. She had to land. The question was where, and whether they could actually make it. Her entire career, every decision, every moment of training, every dark thought she'd ever had about whether she had what it took, it all crystallized in this single moment. Sarah took a deep breath, made eye contact with Marcus for just a fraction of a second, and spoke with absolute conviction. "Okay, we're going to save these people." The night sky stretched endlessly around them, indifferent and infinite. Below, in the darkness, the vast Pacific Ocean waited. The seconds following the engine failure felt stretched, as if time itself was moving through honey. Sarah's mind operated on multiple levels simultaneously, a phenomenon that occurred only in the most critical moments of her career. One part of her brain continued monitoring the aircraft's systems, watching instrument readings with the intensity of a hawk. Another part was already running complex calculations, physics equations, and fuel consumption formulas. A third part was thinking about those 300 people behind her, each one a universe unto themselves, with their own stories, their own loved ones, their own reasons for being on this aircraft. "Flight 447, what is your status?" The air traffic controller's voice crackled through the radio. There was tension in his voice now, controlled, professional, but definitely tense. He understood the gravity of the situation. Sarah didn't respond immediately. She was too busy assessing their options. Her eyes moved systematically across the instrument panel, reading data points like a musician reads a complex score. The single remaining engine was performing adequately but was being pushed. Fuel remaining, 142,000 pounds. Weight of the aircraft, approximately 650,000 pounds with all passengers, cargo, and remaining fuel. Altitude, 35,000 feet and slowly descending, as the single engine couldn't maintain their previous cruising level. ATC, Flight 447, Sarah finally responded, her voice carrying the same controlled calm as always. Assessing options. We are descending to 33,000 feet and holding. Single-engine operation stable at this time. Requesting vectors to nearest divert airport. Marcus was already pulling up airport information on the flight management system. San Francisco is 320 miles. Coronado is 380 miles. There's also Santa Barbara at 280 miles, though it's a smaller field. Sarah's mind immediately eliminated Santa Barbara. The runway was too short for a heavy aircraft on a single engine. San Francisco was the logical choice, but the distance was significant. Flying 320 miles on a single engine at maximum fuel efficiency was within the realm of possibility but left no margin for error. Coronado, at 380 miles, seemed impossible. Yet Coronado was a military airbase with the most sophisticated emergency equipment, the longest runways, and the most experienced emergency response crews. "What's our endurance?" Sarah asked, already knowing the rough mathematics but needing to hear it spoken aloud. Marcus was working furiously on his flight management system. At current descent rate and single-engine cruise, we're looking at approximately 4 hours and 20 minutes of fuel, but that's cutting it close. That assumes perfect conditions, no headwind, no weather complications, perfect efficiency. 4 hours and 20 minutes. Sarah was currently 380 miles from Coronado and 320 miles from San Francisco. At their current descent profile and single-engine speed, they could reach San Francisco in about 2 hours and 15 minutes. They could reach Coronado in approximately 2 hours and 45 minutes. The mathematics were actually feasible, but only just. Except there were variables. There were always variables. "What about the weather ahead?" Sarah asked. Marcus was already checking the meteorological data. His face paled slightly. "We've got a system developing over the Bay Area. Moderate to severe turbulence, wind shear potential, visibility degrading to about 3 miles, and there's a possibility of microbursts in the forecast." Sarah closed her eyes for just a fraction of a second. Microbursts. Sudden downdrafts that could push an aircraft dangerously toward the ground. A normal aircraft with 2 functioning engines might handle a microburst. An aircraft on a single engine was far more vulnerable. The margin for error disappeared entirely. "Coronado?" she asked. "Clear conditions. Winds are light and variable. Visibility unlimited. Runway is 12,000 feet, plenty of runway for a single-engine approach." There it was, the impossible choice crystallizing into something concrete. Sarah's hands gripped the yoke, and she could feel her heart rate elevated, though her breathing remained steady. She'd made difficult decisions before, but those decisions had only involved her life, her career. This decision involved 300 people who had trusted her with their safety. The weight of that responsibility was nearly physical. She thought about the physics of the situation. The aircraft was currently at 33,000 feet and couldn't maintain that altitude on a single engine. She would need to descend, converting potential energy into kinetic energy, using the aircraft's descent to maintain airspeed. A descent towards San Francisco would be relatively controlled, relatively safe. The aircraft would naturally glide toward the coastal airport as altitude decreased. But a descent toward Coronado, 60 additional miles, meant a longer exposure to the failing engine, more time at risk, a shallower descent angle that would require more power to maintain airspeed. It meant pushing the remaining engine harder, asking more of a piece of machinery that had already proven unreliable. It meant asking 300 people to gamble on outcomes that weren't certain. San Francisco's ATC wants to know our intention, Marcus said quietly. Sarah's mind was already made. She understood why the logical choice was San Francisco. Safety margin, weather conditions, proximity. Every rational argument pointed to San Francisco. But Sarah had learned long ago that flying was as much art as it was science. She had an instinct developed over 15,000 hours of flight time. She had gut feelings based on experiences she couldn't quite articulate. And her instinct was screaming at her that Coronado was the right choice. It was a gut feeling based on something deeper than logic. She knew she could land on Coronado's 12,000-foot runway with a single engine, even if the landing would be hot and dangerous. She wasn't certain she could land in San Francisco given the developing weather system, the wind shear, the possibility of microbursts that could push them toward the ocean or the runways. Marcus, calculate our fuel burn rate for a descent to Coronado at best range descent profile, Sarah said. Marcus's hands flew across the control panels and displays. 30 seconds passed. We'd arrive with approximately 18,000 pounds of fuel remaining. That's roughly 30 minutes of additional endurance after landing. 30 minutes, a safety buffer, not huge but substantial. Sarah took a deep breath. She thought about her daughter, who had made her promise not to cancel on Saturday. She thought about those grandchildren. She thought about the 300 people behind her who had no idea how their lives hung on a decision being made right now in a quiet cockpit above the dark Pacific Ocean. ATC, Flight 447, she transmitted, her voice steady and resolute. We are diverting to Naval Station Coronado, requesting emergency clearance, emergency services standing by, and vectors for approach. There was a brief pause from the controller. She could almost hear him processing the decision, checking the logic, understanding what she was committing to. Copy that, Flight 447. Coronado approach is standing by for you. Vectors coming up. You're cleared to descend to 25,000 feet. Maintain best range descent profile. Roger that, ATC. Beginning descent now. Sarah pushed the yoke forward slightly and the aircraft's nose dipped. The altitude began declining. The single engine hummed with the burden of their survival. The descent had begun and there was no turning back now. The mathematics were set, the distances were fixed, and the outcome would be determined by physics, machinery, and Sarah's skill. We're committing to this, Marcus said quietly, more as an observation than a question. We're committing to this, Sarah confirmed, and we're going to land her safely. In the darkness below, the lights of civilization began to appear, distant, scattered, beautiful. Those lights represented survival. Those lights represented hope. Sarah adjusted the descent rate, made minute corrections to the flight path, and began the most dangerous journey of her life. Behind her, 300 people slept, cried, prayed, and waited, unaware that their fate had just been sealed by one woman's impossible decision. The aircraft continued its shallow descent toward the lights of San Diego County. Sarah's eyes never left the instrument panel, her hands maintaining constant pressure on the controls, making microscopic adjustments to maintain their glide path. The single engine hummed with a reliability that seemed almost miraculous given what they'd survived in the past 40 minutes. Time had taken on a strange quality. Each minute felt like an hour, and yet the journey still seemed impossibly far away. Marcus was monitoring fuel consumption with the intensity of a hawk watching a mouse. Every tenth of a pound mattered now. Every second of flight time consumed precious reserves. We're looking good, he said quietly, though his tone suggested he was trying to convince himself as much as Sarah. Current fuel burn rate is holding steady. Sarah nodded but said nothing. Her mind was already 3 steps ahead, running through the landing approach, visualizing the runway, thinking about wind angles, descent rates, touchdown zones. She'd landed thousands of times, but she'd never landed quite like this. in a crippled aircraft on a single engine with weather variables and a military airbase that she'd only flown by, never actually landed at. Flight 447, Coronado Approach is now your primary contact, the ATC controller informed them. We have you on radar, currently 145 miles southwest of the base. You're cleared to descend to 8,000 feet and maintain best rate of descent. Roger that, Coronado Approach. Flight 447 descending to 8,000 feet, Sarah acknowledged. She pushed the yoke forward slightly, increasing the descent angle. The aircraft responded perfectly, the nose dipping as they shed altitude more quickly. Through the windshield, the scattered lights of the San Diego area became clearer, more distinct. Cities and towns spread below them like earthbound constellations. Flight 447, we're picking up military radar confirmation of your position, the Coronado Approach controller continued. Emergency equipment is being positioned on the runway now. We've got fire crews standing by, medical teams on alert, and the runway will be clear for your arrival. Thank you, Coronado, Sarah replied, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. The knowledge that they were ready, that a team of professionals was preparing for their arrival, was profoundly comforting. The moment of crisis, however, wasn't over. If anything, as they descended deeper into the marine layer that characterized the San Diego coast, the tension actually increased. Visibility began to deteriorate. The lights below became less distinct, hazier. The aircraft's descent profile was perfect, but the environmental conditions were complicating factors that even the best planning couldn't entirely control. We're approaching the marine layer, Marcus warned, stating the obvious but understanding that Sarah needed confirmation of what they were both already observing. I see it, Sarah acknowledged. At 12,000 feet, the aircraft began to encounter the thick layer of clouds that hung over the Pacific coast nearly year-round. Visibility dropped to approximately 1 mile. The instrument landing system would be critical now. Sarah couldn't rely on visual references for the final approach. She would need to trust the instruments completely. Flight 447, you're at 85 miles from the base. Continue descent to 6,000 feet, the controller instructed. Roger, descending to 6,000 feet. Sarah made the adjustment, and the aircraft continued its graceful descent through the murk. The landscape below was no longer visible, swallowed by clouds. She was flying purely on instruments now, trusting the mathematics of navigation, the accuracy of the instruments, the reliability of the systems that had been designed by engineers with exactly this situation in mind. At 65 miles out, Sarah decided it was time to make the formal emergency declaration. She'd informed ATC of the emergency situation multiple times, but protocol required a specific Mayday call, 3 times the word Mayday, plus critical information about their situation. Mayday, 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 Sarah transmitted, her voice clear and controlled despite the weight pressing down on her chest. This is Flight 447, Heavy Boeing 777. We have experienced catastrophic failure of our primary engine number 1. We are currently operating on single engine power. We have 300 souls on board plus crew. We are diverting to Naval Station Coronado for emergency landing. Our estimated time of arrival is approximately 35 minutes. We are requesting emergency services standing by. There was a brief pause. Then the controller responded, Roger that, Flight 447. We copy your Mayday declaration. Emergency services are fully activated and standing by. Coronado Base is preparing for your arrival. All civilian traffic has been cleared from the area. The runway is yours. For just a moment, Sarah allowed herself to breathe. The formality of the Mayday declaration, while slightly terrifying, also meant that all the resources of the military base were now dedicated to their survival. Helicopters could be launched if necessary. Search and rescue teams were on standby. The entire base, it seemed, was focused on one aircraft and 300 people trying to make it home. Flight 447, this is Ghost Squadron Lead. A new voice suddenly broke through the radio. The voice was confident, professional, but with an undercurrent of concern that transcended military protocol. We are currently at 25,000 feet, approximately 80 miles north of your position. We are F-22 Raptors on patrol. We are diverting to provide escort assistance for your descent. Sarah's heart rate accelerated slightly. F-22s, the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world. It was both comforting, she would have military protection, and slightly surreal. Fighter jets don't typically escort commercial aircraft. This situation was serious enough to warrant an exception. "Roger that, Ghost Squadron," Sarah responded. "Flight 447 appreciates the escort. We'll be happy to have company on the way down." "Flight 447, we're beginning descent now," Ghost Squadron Lead confirmed. "ETA to your position in approximately 12 minutes. We'll stay with you all the way to landing." Those 12 minutes felt like forever and no time at all. Sarah maintained her descent profile, watching the altitude decrease incrementally. 9,000 feet, 8,000 feet, 7,000 feet. The marine layer remained thick, visibility still limited to approximately 1 mile. But the instruments were steady, the landing system was locked and ready, and help was on the way. Then at 6,500 feet, Sarah saw them. 4 sleek silhouettes emerged from the clouds above and to the right of the aircraft. The F-22 Raptors, with their distinctive delta wing configuration, took positions around Flight 447. They moved with the grace and precision of fighter pilots who had trained their entire lives for moments like this. One moved to the left wing position. One took the right wing. 2 more took positions fore and aft. "Flight 447, Ghost Squadron is now visual on your aircraft," the lead pilot transmitted. "Beautiful work getting this bird this far. We're with you now. You're not alone anymore." Sarah's eyes stung slightly, though she wasn't sure if it was emotion or fatigue. The sight of those fighters surrounding her crippled 777 was simultaneously reassuring and humbling. These pilots, these warriors, had interrupted their patrol mission to help a commercial airliner and 300 civilians. "Thank you, Ghost Squadron," Sarah transmitted. "That means a great deal." "Flight 447, this is Ghost Squadron Lead," the pilot said, and there was something in his voice, an inflection, a particular cadence, that made Sarah's breath catch. "Stand by. I need to ask you something. What is the name of the pilot in command of Flight 447? Sarah froze for just a fraction of a second. That was an unusual request. Protocols didn't typically require fighter pilots to know the captain's name during emergency operations. She glanced at Marcus, who looked equally puzzled. "This is Captain Sarah Mitchell, Ghost Squadron," she replied carefully. There was a pause. Then, when the pilot's voice came back through the radio, it carried a note of something that transcended protocol, transcended military procedure. It was awe. It was recognition. It was something deeper. "Captain Sarah Mitchell," the pilot repeated, and Sarah could hear the emotion in his voice now, barely controlled. "Captain, is it really you? It's been so long." Sarah's hands tightened on the yoke. That voice. She knew that voice. After 25 years, she would know that voice anywhere. "Who is this?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Captain, it's Jackson Coleman, Viper. You taught me at Top Gun. You were the best instructor I ever had." The sky seemed to spin for just a moment, though the aircraft remained perfectly level. Viper. One of her students. One of her most gifted students. The one she'd pushed hardest because she'd seen limitless potential in him. And now, impossibly, he was flying escort for her damaged aircraft. "Viper," Sarah's voice wavered for the first time since the crisis began. "Is that really you?" "Yes, ma'am, Captain, it's me. And I'm here to help bring you home." Silence that followed Viper's words stretched like a taut wire. Sarah's mind raced through memories. 25 years compressed into a fraction of a second. Jackson Coleman. She remembered him vividly, perhaps more vividly than most of her students because he'd been so challenging, so talented, so infuriatingly stubborn about learning everything the hard way before accepting instruction. He had been 27 years old when he'd arrived at Top Gun as a promising Navy pilot with 1,200 flight hours. He'd had confidence that bordered on arrogance, quick reflexes that were genuinely exceptional, and an analytical mind that understood aerodynamics in ways that most pilots never achieved. But he'd also had blind spots. He'd been reckless sometimes. He'd made decisions based on bravado rather than sound judgment. And Sarah had made it her mission to forge that raw talent into something greater, a truly complete pilot. "Viper," Sarah said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "How is this possible? What are the odds of—" "Astronomical, Captain," Viper interrupted gently. "I know, I'm processing it too, but I'm here and right now that's what matters. My flight is at 24,000 feet, 65 miles north of your position. We're descending fast. ETA to your position is now 8 minutes. Sarah glanced at Marcus, whose face was a mask of astonishment. He'd clearly been listening to enough of the conversation to understand that something extraordinary was occurring. "Did you know this person?" he asked, his tone suggesting he wasn't sure what to believe. "A long time ago," Sarah replied. "He was one of my students." As if to confirm the connection, Viper's voice came through the radio again, and this time it carried layers of emotion beneath the professional military protocol. "Captain Mitchell, I want you to know something. Everything I know about remaining calm under pressure, about analytical thinking in crisis situations, about trusting my training when everything is going wrong. I learned from you. You once told me that the difference between a good pilot and a great pilot isn't intelligence or reflexes. It's the ability to compartmentalize fear and transform it into focus." Sarah's eyes stung again. She did remember saying that. She remembered it exactly because Jackson had been fighting with her about it, insisting that fear was a distraction that had to be eliminated entirely. She'd spent 3 hours on the tarmac with him, going back and forth about the nature of human response to stress, about the biology of the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, about how the human brain worked under extreme pressure. "I remember," Sarah said quietly. "You didn't believe me at first." "I didn't," Viper acknowledged. "But I learned, and I've carried that lesson through every mission, every flight, every moment of my career. When I got my first command at the F-22 Squadron, the commanding officer asked me what made me different. I told him it was because an incredible instructor taught me that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was the presence of focus." Sarah felt tears threatening now, which was absolutely unprofessional, absolutely inappropriate. She pressed the heel of her hand against her eye socket, refusing to let emotion compromise her performance. "Viper, right now, I need to focus on landing this aircraft. I need that part of your training to be active in your flying, not in nostalgia." "Yes, ma'am, Captain," Viper responded immediately, and she could hear the respect in his voice, the same respect that had developed between them over those intense weeks at Top Gun. "My flight is now at 20,000 feet and descending rapidly. We'll be visual on your position in 5 minutes. I want you to know that I've followed your career. Civilian aviation, commercial flights. When you left the Navy, we all thought you were abandoning everything we trained for. But I realized later that you were doing something harder. You were trusting your skills to an even greater responsibility. 300 people every flight. No backup. No ejection seat." Sarah's hands remained steady on the controls, but her heart was racing. Of all the things she'd feared tonight, of all the possible complications, the idea that one of her most talented students would be there to help her, it had never occurred to her as even remotely possible. The universe had a sense of poetry sometimes. 4 minutes to visual, Viper reported. "We're in formation flight now. Lead is taking point, wing is taking your left side, and my wingman is positioning for your right side. When we establish visual contact, we'll bracket your aircraft. You won't be flying alone, Captain. Not anymore. Sarah could hear the emotion in his voice again, tightly controlled but definitely there. She thought about the young man he'd been, angry at first about her pushing him, then grateful, then determined to prove he could be the best. She thought about the years that had passed, the lives they'd each lived independently, never imagining they would be reconnected under circumstances like these. "Viper, I need to ask you something," Sarah said. "Since the explosion, have you been monitoring our descent profile?" "Affirmative, Captain. We've been receiving real-time data from Coronado ATC. Your descent is perfect. Your fuel burn is excellent. Your heading is locked. Coronado's instruments are picking up single-engine operation, and your altitude is exactly where it should be." "Do you think we're going to make it?" Sarah asked. She wasn't asking as an instructor asking a student. She was asking as a human being asking another human being who understood the mathematics of flight and survival. There was a pause. Then Viper's voice came back, steady and certain. "Captain, you've already done the impossible. You had an engine failure, made the right decision about where to go, managed the emergency perfectly, and kept 300 people calm through the worst moments of their lives. The hardest part is behind you. Now we just need to stick the landing." "Stick the landing," Sarah repeated. It was a phrase they'd used at Top Gun when discussing the final moments of a flight, when everything came together and you executed perfectly. "Yes, ma'am, and Captain, I want you to know that if anyone in this world can stick this landing, it's you. I've seen you fly. I've studied your techniques. You're not just a great pilot, Captain. You're a legend, and legends don't crash." Sarah felt something crystallize inside her, a sense of purpose, a sense of connection to something larger than herself. She wasn't just flying for those 300 people anymore. She was flying for Viper, for the bond they'd forged so many years ago, for the continuity of everything that aviation represented. "Thank you, Viper," she said simply. "Visual contact," Viper announced suddenly. "I have eyes on Flight 447, establishing formation now. You look good from up here, Captain, real good." Through the windshield, Sarah could see them now, 4 sleek fighter aircraft taking up positions around her wounded 777. The sight was both humbling and empowering. She was no longer alone. She had help. She had someone who understood her, who believed in her, who was willing to risk his own aircraft to ensure her success. The final approach to landing was 45 minutes away. But as Sarah looked at the F-22s surrounding her, as she heard Viper's confident voice in her headset, she knew with absolute certainty that they were going to make it. The past had reached out from the darkness and was bringing her home. The formation descent was poetry in motion. 4 F-22 Raptors in perfect tactical formation, bracketing a crippled Boeing 777, descending together through increasingly thick clouds. Sarah had never experienced anything quite like this. Her aircraft, designed for carrying passengers across long distances, escorted by some of the most advanced military aircraft in the world. It was surreal. It was humbling, and it was absolutely necessary. "Flight 447, Viper here," came the calm voice through Sarah's headset. "We're at 18,000 feet now, descending through 17,500. Maintain your current descent angle. You're tracking perfectly on the approach vector." "Roger that, Viper," Sarah replied. Her voice remained steady, but her mind was working at maximum capacity. The altitude had decreased significantly in the past few minutes. The marine layer had thickened until visibility forward was less than a quarter mile. The cloud formations that had looked relatively benign from above now surrounded them completely, swallowing the formation in a thick blanket of gray moisture. Sarah's instrument scan had become hyper-focused, eyes moving systematically from the attitude indicator to the altimeter to the heading indicator to the airspeed indicator to the vertical speed indicator and back again. The instruments told her the truth. Everything else was illusion. The wings of the aircraft were nearly invisible through the clouds. She could see maybe 5 feet of each wingtip before the clouds swallowed them. The F-22s escorting her were only barely visible as dark shapes through the murk. "Single engine is holding steady," Marcus reported. His voice was tense but professional. "Fuel remaining is 28,000 pounds. At current descent and speed, we're looking at approximately 22 minutes of additional endurance after we touch down." 22 minutes. It sounded like an eternity and no time at all simultaneously. Flight 447 descending through 15,000 feet, Viper's voice came through again. "Coronado is tracking us on radar. Runway is still clear. All emergency equipment is standing by. You're doing great, Captain. Keep this descent profile exactly as is." Sarah made the tiniest adjustment to the trim. The aircraft responded perfectly. The 777 was handling beautifully for an aircraft operating on a single engine. That was Sarah's doing, her years of experience, her intuitive understanding of how this particular aircraft responded, her ability to anticipate the aircraft's needs before problems developed. At 12,000 feet, the clouds became so thick that Sarah could see nothing beyond the windscreen except gray. Pure white gray. No cloud structure, no visual reference points, nothing but an amorphous expanse of condensed water vapor. This was the part of flying that separated the truly skilled from the merely competent. Flying completely on instruments, with no visual reference, required a level of mental discipline and trust in machinery that couldn't be taught. It could only be developed through experience and temperament. "Flight 447, you're looking good," Viper said. There was something different in his voice now, a deepness, a sense of absolute focus that mirrored Sarah's own mental state. "I can see your position on my tactical display. You're locked onto the glide slope. Heading is true. Descent rate is optimal. Just keep doing exactly what you're doing." Sarah felt her hands tighten involuntarily on the yoke. She consciously relaxed them. Tension in the hands could translate to herky-jerky control movements, which could cause the aircraft to deviate from the glide slope. She needed to be smooth. She needed to be precise. She needed to be perfect. At 10,000 feet, the single engine made a sound that terrified her for just a fraction of a second. A slight hesitation, a momentary reduction in power. Sarah's heart nearly stopped. Then the engine stabilized. It continued humming. It had held. "Engine just stuttered," Marcus said, and she could hear the concern in his voice. "I felt it," Sarah replied quietly. "It's stress on the power plant. We're pushing it harder than it's meant to be pushed on a descent like this. Keep monitoring fuel pressure." The descent continued relentlessly. The mathematics of the approach were inexorable. They had to reach a specific altitude at a specific distance from the airport, maintain a specific descent angle, and arrive at the runway threshold at exactly the right altitude and speed to touch down safely. At 5,000 feet, Sarah began to feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Everything she'd done to this point, all the decisions, all the flying, all the engineering and mathematics and physics, now narrowed down to the next 10 minutes. This was the point where things either worked perfectly or catastrophically failed. "Coronado approach, Flight 447, Sarah transmitted. "We are approaching the final descent segment. Request confirmation that runway is clear and emergency services are standing by." "Flight 447, Coronado," came the immediate response. "Runway 27 left is clear and ready for your arrival. Emergency services are fully activated and standing by. You are cleared for approach. Wind is light and variable. Visibility is approximately 1 mile on the ground." 1 mile visibility, not ideal but workable. The descent continued. Sarah's vision had narrowed to the instruments. The outside world had ceased to exist. There was only the glide slope, only the approach angle, only the precise mathematics of bringing an aircraft down from the sky to the earth below. At 2,000 feet, Viper's voice came through again. Flight 447, you are 15 miles from touchdown, descending through 2,000 feet. Your approach is perfect, Captain, perfect. You're going to nail this. Sarah's focus was absolute. The instruments danced before her eyes in a pattern that had been drilled into her consciousness for decades. Every movement of every needle meant something. Every number told a story. At 1,000 feet, the runway lights suddenly appeared through the clouds, golden lights stretching endlessly ahead, guiding her towards salvation. The sight was so beautiful, so meaningful, that Sarah felt tears threaten her vision. She blinked them away fiercely. She couldn't afford even momentary distraction. 500 feet, the altitude call-out system announced in a calm, electronic voice. 400 feet, it continued. 300 feet. The runway was coming toward her. The lights were growing larger, brighter, more defined. Sarah could see the touchdown zone markings now, the white lines that indicated where she should land. 200 feet. 100 feet. Sarah reduced power slightly. The single engine responded perfectly, power decreasing smoothly. The aircraft was now in the last critical moments of approach. 50 feet. 40 feet. 30 feet. The runway filled the windscreen now. Sarah could see individual lights, could see the painted lines clearly. 20 feet. 10 feet. The main landing gear touched asphalt with a gentle thump. Then the nose gear. The aircraft was down. Sarah locked the brakes firmly but not so aggressively as to cause a catastrophic stop. The fuselage groaned and shuddered. Sparks flew from the brake friction. The wheels screamed against the concrete. The aircraft slowed, and finally came to a complete stop in the middle of the 12,000-foot runway, with 6,000 feet of runway remaining ahead of her. For one moment, there was absolute silence in the cockpit. Then Marcus said quietly, "We made it." "We made it," Sarah repeated, and her voice was filled with wonder and exhaustion and profound gratitude for the miracles that had allowed this moment to occur. Behind them, sirens wailed. Fire trucks raced toward them. Ambulances positioned themselves. Emergency personnel spilled across the runway. But in the cockpit, Sarah sat with her hands still on the yoke, unable to move, unable to believe that they had actually succeeded. Viper's voice came through one final time. "Flight 447, you're down safe. You stuck the landing, Captain. You stuck the landing perfectly." The morning sun broke across San Diego Bay with the kind of crystalline clarity that only comes after a night of emotional turbulence. Sarah stood in the operations office at Naval Station Coronado, still wearing her captain's uniform from the previous evening, though it now bore the wrinkles of a night spent partially on a cot in the base medical facility. She'd insisted on being present for the initial investigation, despite the medical team's recommendation for immediate rest. There would be time to sleep. Right now, there were decisions to be made and questions to be answered. The flight had been stripped of passengers and crew by 2 a.m. All 300 people had exited safely, with only minor injuries, a few bruises, some twisted ankles from the emergency evacuation, nothing catastrophic. The medical teams had been thorough, examining everyone, but the reality was clear. Flight 447 had survived. They had all survived. The media had descended like locusts. By the time the sun rose over the horizon, there were 17 news vans parked outside the naval base. News helicopters circled overhead. Sarah's phone had received over 400 calls and messages. Airlines had reached out with job offers. Speaking agents wanted to represent her. Everyone wanted a piece of the story, a piece of the miracle. Sarah had politely declined them all, at least temporarily. There was something she needed to do first. A knock on the door pulled her from her reverie. "Come in," she said. Jackson Viper Coleman entered in full F-22 dress uniform, looking as exhausted as Sarah felt. They'd spent the last 6 hours debriefing with military brass, federal aviation authorities, and emergency management officials. The investigation was already underway. What had caused the engine failure? What had led to the catastrophic loss of thrust? Whether there were design issues that affected the entire 777 fleet. "Captain," Viper said, and despite the formal address, his eyes carried something deeper, the connection of mentor and student, of two people bound together by a moment of extraordinary circumstance. "Jackson," Sarah replied, allowing herself to use his first name. "Thank you for coming." "Wouldn't be anywhere else," Viper said simply. He moved to stand beside her at the window overlooking the runway where Flight 447 still sat, being examined by teams of engineers and investigators. The aircraft looked wounded, the left engine a blackened cavity, the fuselage scorched, every fiber of its structure telling the story of what it had endured. "They're saying it was a catastrophic turbine blade failure, something about metal fatigue that went undetected." "It wasn't your fault, Captain. It wasn't anybody's fault on Flight 447. It was just bad luck," Sarah finished. "Or good luck, depending on how you look at it. If that failure had happened 15 minutes earlier over the ocean with no option for diversion." She didn't finish the sentence. They both understood the mathematics of probability and proximity. "The media is calling you a hero," Viper said. "They want to know everything about you, everything about the emergency, everything about how you saved 300 people. I've got to warn you, this is going to be big, Captain. This is going to be enormous. Your life is about to change." Sarah turned to face him. She studied his face, looking for the young man she'd taught so many years ago. She could see him there underneath the maturity and the rank and the years of military service. "I've been thinking about that," she said quietly. "The offers that are coming in. Everyone wants me to do something, write a book, give talks, monetize the experience. And I understand why. It was dramatic, it was compelling, it will make for good television." "But," Viper asked, sensing there was more. "But what I keep coming back to is something you said last night. You said I was the best instructor Top Gun ever had. You said that everything you know about remaining calm under pressure came from what I taught you. And you said that when you got your command, you talked about the lessons I'd given you." Viper nodded slowly, understanding where she was going. "Last night I had one engine and 300 people depending on me. I was terrified, Jackson, absolutely terrified. But I wasn't paralyzed by that terror because I'd spent decades training to transform fear into focus. I'd spent countless hours in simulators, in briefing rooms, in real emergencies, learning how to think clearly when everything is going wrong. And the reason I could do that is because of all the lessons I'd learned, all the experience I'd accumulated, all the knowledge that had been passed down to me from instructors and mentors who came before me." Sarah moved toward the window again, looking out at the wounded aircraft. "That chain of knowledge, that lineage of learning, is worth more than any book deal. The world doesn't need me to write a dramatic narrative about an emergency landing. The world needs me to teach the next generation of pilots what I know. The world needs me to pass on what I've learned so that when the next pilot faces an impossible situation, they'll have the tools to handle it." "You're going back to teaching," Viper said. It wasn't a question. "I'm going back to teaching," Sarah confirmed. "But not at Top Gun necessarily. I want to create something new. I want to establish an advanced training program, a space where we can take experienced pilots and teach them not just technical skills, but the psychological and philosophical skills necessary to handle extreme emergencies. I want to teach them what you learned, that courage is about transforming fear into focus. I want to create an environment where the next generation learns from the mistakes we've made, from the emergencies we've survived, from the knowledge that's been accumulating in aviation for over a century." Viper's eyes glistened slightly. "That's beautiful, Captain." "It's practical," Sarah corrected gently. "But yes, it's also beautiful, and it wouldn't exist without what happened last night. So I suppose the real miracle isn't that I survived an engine failure. The real miracle is that this catastrophe is going to spark something that might prevent future catastrophes, or at least give people the skills to handle them when they come. Over the next several months, Sarah's vision began to materialize. She established the Mitchell Flight Safety Institute, a non-profit organization dedicated to advanced emergency training for experienced pilots. She brought in experts from every discipline: aviation psychologists, aeronautical engineers, Navy instructors, commercial airline captains. She developed curriculum that went far beyond technical skills into the realm of decision-making, stress management, and leadership under impossible circumstances. Viper became one of her primary instructors, using his military experience and his deep knowledge of tactical flying to help shape the program. Together, they crafted something that was more than an academy. It was a sanctuary for pilots to learn not just how to survive emergencies, but how to excel in moments of crisis. The national news cycle moved on, as it always does. The investigation into Flight 447's engine failure concluded. The aircraft was decommissioned, its parts salvaged and studied. The 300 passengers who had been on board that flight went back to their lives, carrying with them a story they would tell for the rest of their days. But Sarah's story was only beginning. 3 years after that fateful night, Sarah stood before a classroom of 30 advanced pilots, experienced aviators from all branches of military aviation and from commercial airlines around the world. They looked at her with respect, with admiration, with the knowledge that the woman standing before them had faced an impossible situation and not only survived it, but had transformed that survival into wisdom that could benefit them and countless others. "The difference between a good pilot and a great pilot," Sarah began, her voice carrying the same steady confidence that had guided Flight 447 through the darkness, "isn't intelligence or reflexes. It's the ability to compartmentalize fear and transform it into focus." Viper stood in the back of the classroom, smiling. He'd heard that lesson before. He'd learned it the hard way, and it had made him extraordinary. Now, watching Sarah teach that same lesson to a new generation of pilots, he understood something profound about legacy. That true greatness wasn't measured in moments of heroism, but in the endless ripples of knowledge and wisdom that spread outward, touching lives you would never meet, preventing tragedies you would never know about, creating excellence that would outlive you by decades or centuries. The legacy of Flight 447 wasn't the emergency landing. It was everything that came after.
No. Andrà via da solo. Tanto la cam è una merda, quindi non si capisce un cazzo, quindi va benissimo così. Cerco di metterci un po' di buon umore, è lunedì, cerco di tirare un po' sul umore, cerchiamo di essere più positivi, anche se non so come farlo con questo buio disgustoso, è veramente buio. Non posso aprire là, faccio un disastro. Già mi sclera la cam. Cosa faccio? Apro la finestra. Se apro la finestra mi sa che arriva troppa luce. Per avere la graduatoria definitiva. Ok, dopo aprile, cercherò di ricordarmelo. Testi, buongiorno. Sono tornata dal viaggio in famiglia, sì, e ho concluso che non farò mai più uno. Perfetto. Siamo partiti con un po' di ansia, è finita benissimo. È finita benissimo, perfettissimo. Sono contento, tesoro. Perfetto. Io vi dico già subito che ho passato 3 giorni a giocare a Blue Prince. E oggi se non avessi streamato a quest'ora starei giocando Blue Prince. Sempre Blue Prince, solo Blue Prince. Ieri ho fatto un altro trofeo. Ho fatto quello della spesa, quello dello comprare tutto lo showroom. Meraviglioso, meraviglioso. Sono a 7. Diciamo che sarò soddisfatto della mia vita su Blue Prince quando avrò chiuso i trofei. Sono su 16, sono a 7. Capito perché vi dico che non sono neanche a metà gioco? Buongiorno Upi, buongiorno Patata. Cosa volevo mettere un po' di musichetta? Mm, che non voglio mettere. Ah! Allora, sentite. Io non sono qui a tirarvi sul morale, io sono qui a farvi compagnia, a farvi vivere parte della mia giornata. Quindi, per quanto io vorrei mettere qualcosa di positivo, no, vi pigliate questo. Che bella questa canzone. Upi, buongiorno, sei stato patatato, come stai tesoro? Sono stato al viaggio in famiglia, ho concluso che non ci farò mai più uno, traumatico, una bestemmia ogni 5 minuti, vecchi e bambini veramente mi mettono alla prova. Ah, ma ok, ma Testi non è andata male con i tuoi con i familiari? È andata male con il viaggio, cioè il viaggio t'ha cacato il cazzo, ma non è andato male con i familiari. Upi, sei stato patatato, buongiorno, come stai Upi? Io non vedo che me perché sono loro che mi fanno imprecare. Ti capisco benissimo per i miei nonni. Ah, non capisco, Testi, ma ti hanno fatto impazzire in famiglia o ti hanno fatto impazzire durante il viaggio? Perché mi ricordo che ti lamentavi dei vecchi sul treno. Ma sempre quelli. Ah, eccoci qua. Sono ritornato dal parco con la passeggiata del mio cane. Oh, sono contento, sono contento. È andata bene? È andata bene questa passeggiata? È stata... ti senti meno stressato? Senti che il peso del lunedì ti è scivolato via di dosso, Upi? Tra l'altro ottimo quest'ora, fantastico. Cioè torni a quest'ora? Bello. Così almeno ti becchi un po' di freschetto e non c'è neanche troppa gente. Che vuoi tu? Ciao, macchietta. Oggi sei di buon umore, tu? Madonna. Oggi Yuki si fa accarezzare in continuazione, non so cosa ci abbia. Ciao tesoro. Ma sì che sei bello. Buongiorno Ire, ciao tesoro. Ieri ho letto che sei a casa oggi, voi pensate che io non ci sia, ma io ci sono sempre. Ti ho vista da Cutolino, che succede? Penina sei stata patatata. Ta 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 ta. Che bello oggi. Oggi non siamo tanti. Quindi andiamo subito su Final Fantasy VII. Pochissimo, pochissimo. Giusto fare due chiacchiere. Giusto fare due chiacchiere e iniziare la giornata con il giusto piede. Come quando metti il piedino dentro l'acquetta.